I never thought much about my routine. Wake up, walk the dog, sip my coffee while the morning news droned on in the background, and then head to the grocery store by 9 a.m. sharp. It was a predictable life, but predictability had become my comfort zone after years of chaotic relationships and a marriage that ended with more paperwork than passion. That Tuesday morning felt no different, until it was. The grocery store was nearly empty, just the way I liked it. I meandered through the produce section, inspecting the avocados for ripeness, when I noticed someone next to me. He wasn't fumbling through the fruits like most people. He seemed purposeful, confident. "Trick is to check under the stem," he said, holding up an avocado with a charming grin. I blinked, caught off guard by his sudden advice. He was young, early 30s maybe, messy brown hair, a sharp jawline, and eyes that crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled. "Is that so?" I replied, my voice slightly hesitant but curious. "Absolutely. Here, try this one." He handed me the avocado, and our fingers brushed for a brief moment. I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in years, a fleeting but undeniable warmth that lingered far longer than it should have. "Thanks," I said, cradling the avocado and quickly moving to the next aisle, hoping to shake off the strange sensation. But as fate would have it, he appeared again, this time in the coffee aisle. "Hey, you're a French roast kind of woman, aren't you?" I couldn't help but laugh. "What gave it away?" "You've got the vibe," he said, leaning casually against the cart. "I'm Jake, by the way." I hesitated for a moment before responding. "I'm Laura." That was how it started. An exchange over avocados and coffee that left me smiling like I hadn't in years. For the rest of my shopping trip, I found myself glancing around, half hoping to bump into him again, half terrified of what I'd say if I did. It was ridiculous. I was a 53-year-old woman, not some love-struck teenager. Yet, as I loaded my groceries into the car, I couldn't stop thinking about him, Jake, with his easy confidence and infectious smile. Driving home, I told myself it was nothing. A harmless interaction with a friendly stranger. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. Something had shifted within me, a crack in the armor I had spent years building. And just like that, my predictable life didn't feel so predictable anymore that I didn't expect to see Jake again. After all, the grocery store isn't exactly a place where people exchange numbers or plan to meet up. But life, as I was quickly learning, had a funny way of surprising me. The very next week, there he was, standing in front of the bakery section, holding a loaf of sourdough like he'd been waiting for me. "French roast, Laura," he said with a wide grin, as if no time had passed. I couldn't help but laugh. "And you must be avocado, Jake." "That's me," he replied, placing the bread in his cart. "You come here often?" "Every Tuesday."
"You."
"Same." "Guess we're on the same schedule," he said, his tone light, but there was something behind his eyes. A curiosity, a spark of recognition that mirrored my own. We walked together as we shopped, falling into an easy rhythm. He talked about his job. He worked as a graphic designer, and I found myself genuinely interested in hearing about his projects, even though I barely understood half the tech jargon he used. I shared bits and pieces of my life, too. I told him about my daughter, Emily, who had recently moved across the country, and about my small garden at home that I spent too much time fussing over. "You're a gardener, huh?" Jake said, his eyes lighting up. "I've been trying to keep a basil plant alive, but it's not looking good." "I could give you some tips," I offered. "Basil's tricky but manageable." "Deal," he said, grabbing a bundle of fresh basil from a nearby shelf. It became a thing, our weekly grocery trips. I'd find myself looking forward to Tuesday mornings, not for the avocados or coffee but for the chance to see him. There was something about Jake that made me feel lighter, younger even. He had a way of making the mundane feel magical, like when he convinced me to try the bakery's fresh cinnamon rolls right there in the store, laughing as powdered sugar dusted my jacket. "You've got a little," he said, brushing the sugar from my sleeve. His touch was so casual, yet it sent a shiver down my spine. I pushed the feeling away, chalking it up to the novelty of having someone new in my life. As the weeks went by, our conversations grew deeper. He told me about his parents, who lived out of state, and how he missed the chaos of family dinners. I admitted how lonely the house had felt since Emily left. "You should call her," he said one morning as we stood in the parking lot, leaning against our cars. "I do. It's just not the same." "I get that," he said softly, his gaze meeting mine. It was in moments like these that I realized how much joy he was bringing into my life. Jake wasn't just a distraction. He was becoming a friend, a good one. But even as I reveled in the ease of our growing connection, a quiet voice in the back of my mind whispered questions I wasn't ready to answer. Why did I look forward to seeing him so much? Why did his smile linger in my thoughts long after I got home? I wasn't ready to face the answers yet, but one thing was clear. Jake had become more than just a charming stranger. And that realization thrilled and terrified me in equal measure. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when it hit me, an unshakable realization that left me breathless. I was in my kitchen, the sunlight streaming through the windows as I arranged a vase of roses I'd picked up earlier that morning. Jake had mentioned once how much he liked roses, particularly yellow ones. I hadn't bought flowers in years, yet there I was, trimming the stems and carefully arranging them in a way I hoped he'd find beautiful. I paused, the scissors in my hand trembling slightly. Why was I doing this? Why did his opinions matter so much? The realization unfolded slowly, like the petals of the roses before me. I liked Jake. No, more than liked him. The memory of his laughter as he showed me how to properly pick a ripe pineapple replayed in my mind. The way he leaned in when I spoke, genuinely interested in every word. How he remembered the smallest details about me. Details no one had bothered to notice in years. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the roses. My heart felt heavy, full of emotions I hadn't allowed myself to feel in decades. I thought about how our friendship had grown. What started as casual chats in the grocery store had evolved into long walks through the park, a cup of coffee at the corner cafe, and even an impromptu trip to the farmer's market last weekend. It wasn't just his charm or his kindness that drew me in. It was the way he made me feel. Seen. Alive. Important. And now I couldn't ignore it anymore. I wanted more. But that desire came with a rush of fear. I was 53 years old. He was in his early 30s. What would people say? What would he think if he knew? Would he laugh, gently brush me off? Or worse, pull away entirely? My reflection in the window caught my eye. The faint lines around my eyes and the streaks of silver in my hair seemed to scream at me, reminding me of the years that separated us. I couldn't be what someone like Jake would want, could I? Yet, despite the fear, there was something else, something stronger. A feeling I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't as one-sided as I feared. That the way he looked at me sometimes, his eyes soft and warm, wasn't just my imagination. I ran my fingers along the edge of the table, trying to steady myself. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, I wanted to take a chance. On him. On us. Because if I had learned anything from my years of loneliness, it was this. Life was too short to ignore what made your heart race. Even if it felt impossible, the days after my realization were a whirlwind of emotions. Excitement, fear, and doubt swirled around me like an unpredictable storm, leaving me unsure of which way to turn. Every time I saw Jake, my heart raced in a way I hadn't felt since I was a teenager. I'd catch myself studying his face, the curve of his smile, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the easy confidence he carried in his every move. I couldn't help but wonder if he felt something too, or if I was simply projecting my own feelings onto him. But with the excitement came fear. What if I misread everything? What if my feelings scared him away? And even if he did feel the same, what would people think? The thought of being judged, of whispers and sideways glances, made my chest tighten. One afternoon, as I walked through the park where Jake and I often met, I found myself lost in thought. Two teenagers sitting on a nearby bench burst into laughter, and I couldn't help but smile wistfully. I used to laugh like that, carefree and unburdened by the expectations of the world. Somewhere along the way, life had worn me down, responsibilities, loss, and the loneliness that had settled into my life like an unwelcome guest. But Jake made me feel like that girl again, the one who used to dream big and laugh freely. Still, the doubts lingered. "Laura, you're being ridiculous," I muttered to myself, sitting on a weathered wooden bench. "He's young, vibrant. What could he possibly see in someone like you?" But even as I tried to talk myself out of my feelings, memories of our moments together played in my mind. The way he leaned closer when I spoke, his hand brushing mine as we reached for the same apple at the farmer's market, his warm laughter when I shared a silly story from my youth. I hadn't felt this alive in years, and the thought of walking away from that scared me just as much as the prospect of taking a step forward. That night, as I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing my hair, I let myself confront the one thought I'd been avoiding. Did I deserve this? Did I have the right to pursue something that might bring me joy, even if it defied societal expectations? The answer didn't come easily, but as I turned off the light and climbed into bed, I made a quiet promise to myself. I didn't have to figure it all out right now, but I wouldn't let fear control me. Not anymore, because if there was one thing I knew deep in my soul, it was that Jake had brought color back into my world, and I wasn't ready to let that go. The idea had been floating around in my mind for days, and no matter how many times I tried to dismiss it, it refused to leave. I wanted Jake to come over to my home. I wanted to share my space with him, to open up in a way that was more intimate than a walk in the park or a cup of coffee. It was a quiet, unspoken desire, but it felt so right. Of course, I told myself it was harmless. After all, we were friends. He came over to my place a few times before, and we'd shared a few laughs over dinner, exchanged stories about our lives, and just existed in the same space. But this time, I didn't want it to be just a casual get-together. This time, it had to be different. It had to mean something. I stood in my kitchen, staring at the empty counter, thinking about how to make it happen. I could cook dinner, something simple but special. Maybe a glass of wine to make it feel a little more relaxed, a little more personal. But as I considered it, a wave of nerves washed over me. Was this too forward? Would I be making him uncomfortable? What if he didn't see me the way I saw him? I had spent years trying to be the calm, collected woman, always in control, never letting my emotions run wild. But now here I was, a woman in her 50s with a heart that was suddenly unpredictable, tangled in a web of excitement, fear, and longing. I couldn't help but wonder, though, what did I want from this? What was I hoping would happen if I invited him over? I told myself it was just to spend time together, to continue deepening our friendship, but deep down I knew that wasn't entirely true. I wanted more than just friendship. I wanted to see where this connection could go. There was no denying it any longer. I was falling for him. Taking a deep breath, I picked up my phone, my fingers hesitating over the keyboard. I texted him, "Hey Jake, I've been making your favorite pasta tonight. Would you want to come over for dinner? I'd love your company." I stared at the message before sending it, feeling my heart race. I didn't want to overthink it, but every part of me was on edge. What would he say? Would he agree? The seconds stretched into what felt like eternity. Then, finally, my phone buzzed. I quickly opened the message, holding my breath. "That sounds great, Laura. I'll be there around 7. A wave of relief washed over me, followed by an undeniable excitement. I had done it. I had taken the first step. Now all I could do was wait. When the doorbell rang at 7 p.m., I felt my heart leap into my throat. I quickly smoothed down my blouse and took a deep breath, steadying myself before opening the door. There stood Jake, casually dressed in a t-shirt and jeans, his smile wide and genuine. He looked radiant, as if the evening itself was an extension of his warmth. "Hey," he said, his voice carrying that easy confidence that always made me feel both comforted and, inexplicably, a little nervous. "I hope I'm not late." "No, you're perfect," I replied, my voice betraying the nerves I was trying to conceal. He stepped inside, his presence filling the space in a way that was at once familiar and new. It was as if he had always been a part of my life, but now, in this moment, things felt different, more intimate. I led him to the dining room, where the table was set for 2, the soft light of the candles flickering in the dimmed room. The pasta was still warm, steam rising from the dish, and I was proud of the meal I'd made. It wasn't fancy, but it was something I knew he liked, something that reflected the care I wanted to show him. "This looks amazing," he said, taking a seat at the table. "I've been looking forward to this all day." I smiled, feeling a sense of pride, but also an underlying tenderness that I hadn't expected. There was something about having him in my home, sharing a meal together, that made everything feel so right. As we ate, the conversation flowed effortlessly. We talked about everything. Memories from our pasts, our favorite books, the music we each loved, and even the things we hadn't realized we had in common. There were moments when our hands brushed as we both reached for the breadbasket, and I couldn't ignore the electricity that passed between us. It was subtle, but it was undeniable. At one point, Jake leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You know, Laura," he said, his voice soft and sincere, "I never would have guessed that we'd end up here like this. I'm really glad we're doing this." I felt my pulse quicken, my chest tightening with the weight of his words. He wasn't just talking about dinner, he was talking about us. He was acknowledging the unspoken connection that had been growing between us. "I am too," I whispered, unable to hide the emotions that were beginning to flood through me. For a moment, there was silence between us, not uncomfortable, but filled with something deeper. A quiet understanding hung in the air, as if we both knew that this dinner, this night, was a turning point in something that neither of us had fully anticipated but both had secretly hoped for. After dinner, we moved to the living room, where the conversation continued, but now it was different. There was a new layer to it, a layer of intimacy that I hadn't expected. As Jake sat on the couch beside me, the space between us seemed to shrink, and I found myself drawn to him in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. Without thinking, I reached out and gently touched his arm. He turned toward me, his gaze locking with mine. The world seemed to fall away as I stared into his eyes that held a depth I hadn't expected, a depth that matched my own feelings in ways I hadn't allowed myself to fully acknowledge. In that moment, it was as if everything I had been holding back, everything I had been afraid to say, to feel, was suddenly brought to the surface. The weight of the connection between us was undeniable. It wasn't just friendship anymore. It was something deeper, something that had the potential to change everything. "Jake," I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't let me finish. Instead, he gently cupped my face in his hands, his thumb brushing across my cheek. And then, without a word, he kissed me. It was soft, tentative at first, as if he was unsure, testing the waters. But as the kiss deepened, I realized something. I wasn't the only one feeling this. He was just as affected, just as drawn to me as I was to him. In that kiss, all the uncertainty, the fear, and the doubts melted away. It wasn't about age or judgment or anything else. It was about two people, sharing something real, something raw, and for the first time in years, it felt like I was truly alive. The days that followed that night were a whirlwind. Each moment felt heavier with emotion, yet more alive than I had felt in years. I had tried to keep my feelings for Jake at bay, tried to convince myself that it was just a fleeting attraction, nothing more than a passing phase. But deep down, I knew it was more. It wasn't just the physical chemistry that ignited something inside of me. It was the way he made me feel seen, valued, and desired in a way I hadn't experienced in so long. I spent hours reflecting on it all. On the kiss, on the connection, on what it meant. It was overwhelming, yes, but it was also incredibly freeing. I realized how much of my life had been spent suppressing my own desires, my own needs. I had gotten comfortable in my solitude, convinced that my years of longing and lost opportunities were behind me. But Jake made me feel young again, not in the sense of my physical age, but in my spirit. Yet I couldn't ignore the questions that loomed over me. Was I crazy to feel this way? To fall for someone so much younger? Was I too old for him? Too far removed from the world of youth and carefree love? These questions echoed in my mind, and I knew they would only grow louder as the days went by. As I sat at my kitchen table one morning, sipping my coffee, I found myself reflecting on the nature of love. The kind of love I had known with my ex-husband. The safe, steady love that had grown over the years, tempered by routine and familiarity. It had been good, but it hadn't been passionate. It hadn't been exciting. And when we had parted ways, I realized how much I had missed that spark, that feeling of being truly desired and alive. But with Jake, it was different. There was an intensity to our connection, a rawness that made me feel like I was experiencing love for the first time, even though I had been married and had children. It wasn't about age. It was about the way we made each other feel. Age had nothing to do with the way my heart raced when he smiled at me, the way I couldn't wait to hear his voice, or the way I craved his touch. I had always heard people say that love is ageless, but I never truly understood that until now. I had allowed my age to define me in so many ways. Society had taught me that there were certain things I was no longer supposed to want, no longer supposed to seek. But with Jake, I realized that love doesn't have a timeline. It doesn't care about the years that have passed or the number of birthdays celebrated. It's about connection. It's about finding someone who makes you feel alive in ways you never thought possible. In the past, I would have let the voices of doubt and judgment sway me. I would have worried about what others would think, about the stares and the whispers. But now, something had changed within me. I no longer cared about the opinions of others. What mattered was how I felt with Jake. What mattered was the joy he brought to my life and the way we could explore the world together, regardless of the years between us. Love, I realized, isn't about the number of years you've lived. It's about how you live in those years. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly living. As I looked out the window, my heart swelled with anticipation for the future. Whatever it held, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let fear or age hold me back anymore. I wasn't going to let society's expectations dictate the path I walked. I was going to embrace this love, this feeling, no matter where it took me. And with Jake, I felt ready to face whatever came next. The days with Jake became a tapestry of moments, simple yet profound. Each glance, each touch, each laugh we shared felt like it was weaving something stronger between us, something that could never be broken by the judgments of others. I realize now that love is not about the years that separate us from someone else, nor the expectations that society tries to impose on us. Love is about connection, about finding someone who sees you, really sees you, and makes you feel alive in ways you never thought possible. It wasn't easy, and there were days filled with doubt. There were nights when I lay awake, wondering what people would think. But with Jake by my side, those fears began to fade. I had spent too many years hiding from my desires, from the parts of me that longed to feel the thrill of a love so passionate and fresh. But now, I felt like I was finally living in a way that was authentic and true to myself. Through this journey, I had come to understand that love does not follow a timeline. It doesn't respect the age you are, or the expectations others place on you. It doesn't care about the years you've lived or the scars you've carried. What matters is the way it makes you feel, the way it transforms you and opens your heart to possibilities you never imagined. And so, as I stand here now, I feel a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected love that came into my life when I least expected it. I no longer see my age as a limitation, but as a testament to all the lessons I've learned, all the experiences that have shaped me into the woman I am today. I am not just the sum of my years, but the sum of my passions, my desires, and my willingness to embrace life, no matter where it takes me. For anyone who is afraid to love again, afraid to step outside of the lines that society has drawn for them, I say this: don't let fear keep you from living. Don't let age or the expectations of others tell you what is possible for your heart. Love can come in many forms at any stage of life, and when it does, it's worth embracing with everything you have. So here I am, standing proudly beside the man I love, a love that has filled my heart and soul in ways I never thought possible. And as I look forward to the future, I know one thing for sure: love has no expiration date.